It was a crisp morning in the city, and the gallery was as pristine as it always was, well lit, full of modern art, and exuding an air of exclusivity. The kind of place where only those with impeccable taste and a fat wallet dared to enter. Yet, on this particular day, there was a peculiar kind of energy in the air, one that felt tense, as if the gallery was on the precipice of something unknown. For most, this was just another Thursday. For Jalen Brooks, it was the beginning of a change he couldn't yet comprehend. Jalen stood quietly in the corner of the gallery, his eyes trained on the piece he had just installed. The painting was massive, stretching nearly the entire length of the room. Bold strokes of dark reds, blacks, and golds were layered together in a way that seemed chaotic at first glance, but upon closer inspection, told a complex story of battle, strength, and survival. The piece depicted a human warrior, large and imposing, standing victorious on a battlefield littered with alien corpses. Around him, alien ships lay in ruins, their hulls cracked open and smoking. The title of the piece was simple: Dominance. For years, Jalen had poured his heart into his art. He was fascinated by stories of humanity overcoming the odds, stories of warriors and fighters who proved time and time again that they were capable of feats beyond belief. His work was inspired by his love of science fiction, stories about human combat prowess against impossible odds, often set in alien worlds. The Deathworlders, as he called them, were his muses, humans who were unmatched in combat, who trained on hostile planets and became the most feared beings in the universe. Jalen's paintings were a tribute to them. But to the world of art collectors, Jalen's work was simply too aggressive. It was too brutal, too raw, too violent, according to the critics. They didn't understand his vision. They didn't understand what the Deathworlders represented. The idea that humanity could rise above its limitations and conquer entire galaxies was a message lost on them. And today, as Jalen stood alone in the corner of the gallery, it felt as though the world had proven him right once again. The gallery owner, a pompous and self-assured man named Richard Ashford, had been skeptical from the beginning. He was known for his sharp eye for what was trendy and what was in, and he had seen something in Jalen's work that he couldn't quite explain, though it certainly wasn't good. To Ashford, the painting didn't fit. It didn't align with the safe, highbrow art the gallery was known for. It didn't scream sophistication or delicate beauty. Instead, it was aggressive, defiant, and in his opinion, downright ugly. Jalen had walked into the gallery that morning with hope in his heart, unaware that this was the beginning of a battle that would define the course of his career. "Jalen, my friend," Richard said as he approached, his voice dripping with a false sense of congeniality. "I see you brought another one of your, how shall I put this, bold pieces. Tell me, what is it this time? Another warrior standing over a pile of alien corpses?" Jalen's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "It's called Dominance. It's a story of humanity rising above adversity. I think it'll resonate with people." Richard raised an eyebrow, his gaze drifting over the painting with a feigned sense of disinterest. "Resonate with people?" he chuckled, his voice condescending. "Jalen, don't you realize? People want beauty. They want elegance. They want something to hang in their pristine living rooms. Not this barbaric spectacle." The words stung, but Jalen refused to let them show. He had been dealing with people like Richard his entire life, those who couldn't understand his passion, couldn't see the beauty in strength and survival. "It's more than that," Jalen replied calmly. "It's about the resilience of the human spirit. It's about showing that we can overcome anything, no matter the odds." Richard's lips curled into a thin smile. "Oh, I'm sure it's very deep, Jalen. But honestly, he gestured toward the painting with a dismissive flick of his hand. "This isn't art. It's not even a story. It's just violence, pure and simple. I'm afraid it doesn't belong here." The words hit Jalen like a punch in the gut, but he steadied himself. He knew that Richard had a reputation to uphold, one built on traditional notions of art, ones that didn't involve humanity's rise through grit and blood. But the gallery owner's mockery was nothing new. People had been laughing at Jalen's style for years, dismissing his work as unrefined or too intense. They didn't understand what he was trying to convey. The Deathworlders, his muses, were never meant to be pretty or polished. They were meant to be raw, powerful, and unapologetic. But to them, it wasn't the kind of art they wanted in their gallery. Jalen's mind raced as he considered the implications. Richard was right about one thing: this wasn't traditional art. It wasn't the kind of art that spoke to soft souls and delicate sensibilities. His art was the art of warriors, the art of human perseverance. The Deathworlders weren't just characters, they were symbols of everything humanity could be if it pushed past its limitations. And yet, here he was, standing in front of a man who didn't understand the very essence of his creations. "It's not about elegance, Richard," Jalen said softly, a quiet defiance in his voice. "It's about strength. About showing that we can stand up to any challenge, no matter how impossible." Richard scoffed. "Strength, huh? Sure. Maybe if your Deathworlders were a bit more refined, I'd consider it. But right now, it just looks like, well, like a bunch of savages with guns." The words echoed in Jalen's mind, a reminder of how far he still had to go to make the world see what he saw in his art. His mind flickered to his inspirations, the stories he'd read about humanity conquering alien species in combat, how the Deathworlders could outsmart and outfight anyone who stood in their way. That was the essence of humanity: strength, resilience, and the will to survive. But in Richard's eyes, it was nothing more than chaos. "Maybe someday, you'll understand," Jalen muttered under his breath, turning away from the gallery owner. "Maybe someday, the world will see what I'm trying to say." But as he walked away from the gallery, his mind was heavy with doubt. He had never doubted his art before, never questioned his vision, but today, something was different. Perhaps Richard's words were more than just dismissals, they were a reflection of the world's view of him. Perhaps the world wasn't ready for his message. Perhaps humanity's story wasn't the one people wanted to hear. As the door to the gallery closed behind him, Jalen took one last look at the painting, his heart aching. The Deathworlders were standing victorious over their foes, but in this world, it was Jalen who felt defeated. Little did he know that this moment of mockery would be the spark that set everything in motion. The weeks following Jalen's confrontation with Richard were hard. The sting of the gallery owner's mockery still lingered, echoing in Jalen's mind as he worked tirelessly in his cramped studio. Despite his passion and the stories of human supremacy he sought to tell through his art, the world felt distant and unyielding. The echoes of Richard's words, "savages with guns," had burned into his memory, igniting a sense of frustration and desperation. Jalen's studio was far from glamorous, located on the edge of the city in an industrial complex. The walls were a dull gray, the lighting harsh and fluorescent, and the floors were covered in layers of paint splatters, evidence of years spent creating. Yet, within that space, Jalen found solace. It was here, in the solitude of his work, that he could hear the stories of the Deathworlders clearly. It was here that the pulse of humanity's triumph over adversity beat strongest. As he stood in front of his latest canvas, Jalen's mind wandered to the intricate designs he had created. This new painting, titled The Uprising, was unlike anything he had done before. It depicted a group of human warriors, clad in sleek, futuristic combat suits, standing side by side with alien allies, beings of various shapes and sizes, on the brink of battle against an oppressive, totalitarian alien regime. There was no subtlety here. This was about rebellion, about rising up, about taking back control from those who thought humanity was weak. The humans, painted with bold and powerful brushstrokes, stood at the forefront, ready to lead the charge. Their faces were strong, confident, and full of determination. The aliens around them, often seen as the invaders in many of Jalen's previous works, were now allies, showing that humanity could inspire not only their own people but even those once thought to be their enemies. It was a story of unity and strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Jalen had always believed that art was more than just a representation of beauty. It was a way to tell a story, to express emotions, and to connect people to something deeper within themselves. And for him, that connection was rooted in humanity's potential to rise above its flaws, to overcome every challenge, no matter the size or the enemy. The Deathworlders were the embodiment of this. They were humanity's ultimate form, superior in combat, in intelligence, and in spirit. As the brushstrokes flowed onto the canvas, Jalen began to lose himself in the process. The work became more than just paint on a surface, it became a manifestation of his thoughts, his dreams, and his deepest beliefs. But still, the nagging doubt lingered. Richard's words had cut deep. Savages with guns. The art world, in its pursuit of beauty and perfection, could never understand the power and the raw emotion and strength that Jalen poured into his pieces. They only saw the violence, the power, and the raw force of humanity in a way that made them uncomfortable. He spent long nights working on the uprising, not caring for the passing of time. The only thing that mattered was getting the painting right. Every stroke, every detail, had to reflect the strength of his vision. As the painting neared completion, Jalen began to feel a sense of pride. Despite the world's rejection of his work, despite the mockery, he knew that his art had value. His message was important, it was a call to arms for humanity to recognize its true potential. But the art world wasn't kind to those who pushed boundaries. Jalen knew this all too well. Every rejection he faced, every critical comment, only added fuel to his fire. He refused to let Richard's scorn define him. The more he painted, the clearer it became that he wasn't just telling stories of warriors and aliens, he was telling the story of himself. The story of a man who had faced rejection and mockery and who would rise above it all. On a particularly long night, Jalen took a step back to admire the uprising. The colors were bold and dynamic, swirling across the canvas with the intensity of a battlefield. The humans in the painting stood like titans, their backs straight and their faces hardened with determination. It was a piece that demanded attention, a piece that challenged the viewer to question what they thought they knew about strength, about survival, and about what it meant to be human. As he looked at it, Jalen felt something stir within him, an idea, a new path forward. If the art world wouldn't accept him, he would find another way. He couldn't let the gallery owner's scorn be the end of his story. No, Jalen would push forward. He would find an audience who understood the power of his art. He would find people who saw beyond the surface, who recognized the message beneath the violence. The thought of selling his work in galleries seemed increasingly unappealing to him. His pieces were meant for something more, something grander than the confines of the traditional art world. They were meant to inspire, to ignite a fire in the hearts of those who viewed them. He could already see the potential, he could sell them to collectors who understood the true value of his work, collectors who saw the power in his portrayal of humanity's supremacy. But it wasn't just about selling paintings anymore. Jalen wanted to build something, a movement, a community. His art wasn't meant to sit in sterile galleries, hidden behind glass and untouched by the world. It was meant to inspire change. To prove that humanity's potential was limitless. Weeks passed, and the idea took root in Jalen's mind. The gallery scene was not the place for him. He would take his art directly to the people. But where? How? His thoughts were interrupted one morning as he received an unexpected call. It was from an art critic, a former friend of Richard's, who had seen the uprising during a private showing. "Jalen, I saw your work. The new one. It's remarkable," the critic said, his voice filled with a genuine awe that Jalen hadn't expected. "I know Richard may not get it, but I do. This piece, it's something different. Something powerful. You're onto something here." Jalen felt a surge of hope. Could it be? Could the world finally be ready for his message? The critic's words were a balm to his wounds. Maybe the art world wasn't as closed off as he thought. Maybe there were people out there who understood. Maybe Richard's mockery had been the catalyst he needed, the spark that lit the fire within him to push forward. And so, Jalen decided to take action. He would no longer wait for approval from people like Richard. He would make the world see his vision. The Deathworlders, the symbol of human strength, would rise. And with them, Jalen would rise as well. His journey was far from over, but one thing was clear, the artist who had been mocked was no longer a bystander. He was on a mission to show the world the true power of humanity, and no one, not even Richard Ashford, could stand in his way. As he stood in his studio, looking at the uprising, Jalen felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was only the beginning. The days following the critics' call brought a sense of urgency to Jalen's work, a sense of something bigger on the horizon. His thoughts constantly turned to the idea of human supremacy, of humanity's potential to overcome every challenge in its way. The Deathworlders, the warriors in his art, were not merely creations of fiction. They were the very embodiment of humanity's strength, intelligence, and resilience. The more Jalen painted, the more he realized that the true story he was telling wasn't just about warriors on a battlefield. It was about the future, about humanity's potential to dominate in every arena, to rise above every limitation. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings in the distance, casting long shadows through his studio window, Jalen sat quietly before a new canvas. This one was different. It wasn't a single image of victory or survival. It was a larger concept, a vision of humanity's destiny. He had always painted the Deathworlders as individual figures, but now, he wanted to show the entire journey. This was to be a masterpiece, a representation of the grand arc of human evolution, from its humble beginnings to its rise as the dominant force in the galaxy. As his brushstrokes began to form, Jalen felt a sudden, overwhelming clarity. The revelation came to him in a rush. The Deathworlders weren't just a metaphor for strength, they were symbols of humanity's unrelenting drive to evolve, to adapt, and to conquer. Every time a human triumphed over an alien adversary, they were not just winning a battle. They were proving that humanity was the superior species, capable of thriving in the most hostile environments, overcoming every obstacle thrown in its path. Jalen could see it now: humanity would not just survive, it would thrive in a universe filled with dangers. His art had always been about survival, about overcoming the odds, but now it was about something much bigger, the ultimate supremacy of humanity. The Deathworlders were his vision of what humanity could become, warriors not just in battle, but in every facet of life. They were conquerors, leaders, and innovators. They would not just defend their world, they would dominate the stars, shaping the future of the universe. With this new understanding came a sense of purpose. Jalen had been creating art for years, but now, it wasn't just about making paintings to hang on walls. It was about telling a story of humanity's rise to the top of the galactic food chain. The art world had failed to see this, but that didn't matter. The true audience for his work wasn't the pretentious elites in their galleries, it was everyone. He would share his vision with the world, show them what he saw in his mind, and make them understand the true potential of humanity. Jalen worked feverishly over the next several days, bringing his vision to life. The new painting, titled Ascension, depicted a group of Deathworlders standing on a barren planet, looking up at the stars. The sky was filled with ships, vast fleets of human vessels soaring through the cosmos, lighting up the dark expanse with their presence. It wasn't just a picture of victory, it was a picture of humanity's destiny. The Deathworlders, once isolated on their harsh homeworlds, were now leading the charge into the stars, the first of many to follow. The galaxy was theirs to conquer. As he added the final touches to the painting, Jalen stood back and surveyed his work. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of deep satisfaction. This wasn't just another painting. This was a vision of the future. This was humanity's story, and he had finally unlocked the key to telling it. But with this revelation came a new challenge: how could he make the world see what he saw? How could he get people to understand that his art was more than just a series of violent images? It wasn't about aggression or brutality, it was about the strength of humanity, the undeniable drive to overcome every challenge. The Deathworlders weren't savages, they were heroes. They were the embodiment of humanity's potential to rise above its flaws, to conquer the impossible, and to shape the future. Jalen knew he had to do something to make people understand. The traditional art world had already rejected him. Richard Ashford had mocked him, dismissed his work as nothing more than savage violence. But Jalen couldn't let that stop him. If the art world didn't understand, then he would go beyond it. He would find a new way to share his art, a new way to tell the story of humanity's supremacy. The thought of building a movement around his work became more and more appealing. Jalen's paintings were not just images on canvas, they were messages, calls to action. The Deathworlders were more than fictional characters, they were a symbol of what humanity could become. He would find others who understood his message, who saw the potential in his work. He would build a community of like-minded individuals who recognized the value in strength, resilience, and human supremacy. In a moment of clarity, Jalen realized that his art wasn't meant to sit in galleries or private collections. It was meant to be seen, to be experienced by the world. It was meant to inspire. He could already see the impact it could have. People would see his paintings and feel a surge of pride, a newfound belief in the potential of humanity. His work could change the way people thought about themselves, about their place in the world, and about the future they could build. As he sat in his studio, surrounded by his work, Jalen felt a sense of determination that he hadn't felt before. He had found his purpose. The world might not understand now, but they would. He would make sure of it. The Deathworlders would rise, and with them, humanity would rise as well. He knew that this was only the beginning. His journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, and he would face many more challenges along the way. But Jalen was ready. He had a vision, and he was determined to see it through. The world would soon understand the true power of his art. And when they did, they would see that the Deathworlders were not just characters in a painting, they were the future. Jalen stood up from his easel and looked at Ascension one last time. It was a fitting name for the piece. The Deathworlders had ascended from their harsh beginnings to become the masters of the universe. And soon, humanity would follow in their footsteps. The future was waiting, and Jalen was ready to take it on. Jalen's decision to take his art beyond the traditional gallery scene had ignited a fire within him. He couldn't ignore the call any longer. He had a message that needed to be heard, a message that transcended the canvas. The Deathworlders, the embodiment of human strength and dominance, would lead the charge for a new kind of artistic movement. This was no longer just about creating paintings, it was about creating a cultural shift. Jalen was going to make the world see what he saw. He would become the leader of a new kind of art revolution, one that embraced humanity's potential to dominate. The first step was clear, he needed a platform. If the galleries wouldn't give him the space to showcase his work, he would find another way. Jalen began researching online platforms where he could share his art with a larger audience. Social media became his primary tool. Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook were all potential avenues to get his work seen. He also looked into starting a YouTube channel, where he could not only showcase his paintings but tell the story behind them, explaining the deeper meaning of his work to a global audience. One evening, while sketching the outline of a new piece, Jalen had an idea. If he wanted to create a true movement, he couldn't just rely on the art community alone. He needed to reach people who felt the same pride and determination that he did, people who believed in the strength and resilience of humanity. He thought about the sci-fi stories he had read as a child, the tales of warriors who overcame impossible odds, and how these stories had shaped his worldview. This was the type of message he wanted to send. Humanity was capable of achieving greatness, no matter the challenges they faced. He knew he couldn't be the only one who felt this way. There were people out there, sci-fi enthusiasts, fans of the HFY, humanity, genre, and those who believed in human potential. If he could tap into that community, Jalen thought, he could build something far bigger than just an art movement. He could create a cultural awakening. The first step was to set up his social media accounts. He posted regularly, sharing his new pieces along with explanations of their meanings. He was open and raw about the inspiration behind the Deathworlders and the message of human supremacy he was trying to convey. The more he posted, the more he felt connected to an audience that shared his passion. At first, the response was lukewarm. A handful of likes here and there, a few supportive comments, but nothing that suggested a widespread movement. But Jalen didn't let this deter him. He knew that it would take time. The message he was sending wasn't going to be understood overnight. But as the weeks went on, something began to shift. More people started following him. They were intrigued by his art, by the stories he told through his paintings, and by the boldness of his vision. One evening, a comment from a follower caught his eye. It read, "Your art is exactly what we need right now. Humanity needs to remember its potential. The Deathworlders are the future. Keep going." Jalen's heart swelled with pride. Someone understood. Someone saw the same vision he had been trying to communicate. It was a small comment, but it was the validation he needed. The seeds of a movement had been planted. Encouraged, Jalen took his efforts a step further. He started producing video content on his YouTube channel, where he could explain his artwork in greater depth. He created videos where he discussed the stories behind the Deathworlders, why he believed in the concept of human supremacy, and how the human race could learn from the resilience and adaptability of these fictional warriors. He connected with his audience, speaking directly to them, showing them the power of the message in his art. One of the first videos that went viral was a deep dive into the Deathworlders' origins and how they represented the pinnacle of human evolution. In the video, Jalen used powerful visuals from his artwork, combined with clips from popular sci-fi movies and stories that had inspired him. He painted a picture of a future where humanity not only survived but thrived in the harshest conditions, where humans were feared and respected throughout the galaxy for their strength, intelligence, and resilience. The video struck a chord with viewers. Comments flooded in, expressing excitement and admiration for Jalen's vision. Many of the viewers were fans of the HFY genre, and they saw in Jalen's work a new way to explore human potential. They were inspired by the idea of humanity not just surviving, but dominating. Some even shared their own personal stories about how they overcame adversity in their own lives, and how Jalen's art reminded them of their strength. As the movement began to grow, Jalen started to connect with like-minded creators, authors, content creators, and artists who shared his passion for the HFY genre. Together, they began to collaborate, creating a community of individuals who believed in human supremacy and the power of the Deathworlders. Jalen's art became the rallying cry for a new generation of thinkers, creators, and warriors, those who believed that humanity was capable of greatness, no matter the obstacles. One day, as Jalen was scrolling through his social media accounts, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. A post from an influential sci-fi author, known for writing about human triumphs in the face of alien adversity. The post read, "I've been following Jalen Brooks' work for months now, and I can honestly say his paintings are a glimpse into our future. The Deathworlders aren't just art, they're a vision of what humanity can become. If you're not following him, you're missing out." The author's endorsement was a game-changer. Within hours, Jalen's following exploded. His YouTube channel gained thousands of subscribers overnight, and his social media accounts were flooded with messages of support and admiration. The movement was no longer just a small community, it was growing, and it was growing fast. Jalen knew that he had to capitalize on this momentum. He started organizing live streams and virtual art shows, where he would paint in real time, answering questions from his growing audience. These events became a way for fans to connect with Jalen directly, to learn about the deeper meaning behind his art, and to discuss the potential of humanity in a galaxy full of challenges. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a leader, a spokesperson for a movement that sought to remind humanity of its potential and its place as the dominant species in the universe. With every piece he created, with every video he posted, Jalen felt the movement grow stronger. The Deathworlders were no longer just characters in his paintings, they had become a symbol of human strength and resilience, a call to action for all who believed in humanity's supremacy. What started as a small artistic rebellion against a narrow-minded art world had grown into a global movement, one that was poised to change the way humanity saw itself. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Jalen knew one thing for sure, the Deathworlders had risen, and with them, so had humanity. Jalen had never imagined that his art would become a symbol of resistance. Yet, as the months passed, it became clearer to him that the Deathworlders weren't just about the future of humanity in the stars, they were about challenging the current state of the world. As the movement grew, it gained not only artists and creators, but activists, thinkers, and ordinary individuals who had long felt disconnected from the mainstream narratives that dominated popular culture. They were drawn to Jalen's vision because it was more than just a story of victory, it was a story of empowerment, of reclaiming strength, and of asserting humanity's place at the top. In the quiet of his studio, Jalen felt the weight of his growing influence. His YouTube channel had exploded, with millions of views on his videos about human potential and supremacy. His social media accounts had grown into a hub for fans of the HFY genre, where people from all walks of life gathered to discuss humanity's place in the universe. The Deathworlders had become something more than just a motif in his paintings. They were a cultural movement, a collective force challenging the status quo, encouraging people to take pride in their humanity. But with the rise of this movement came a new challenge: how to keep it from being co-opted by those who didn't understand its true meaning. As the movement grew in popularity, it attracted the attention of large organizations and institutions that sought to profit from it. Some tried to commodify the Deathworlders, turning them into a brand for merchandise, while others sought to dilute Jalen's message for the sake of broader appeal. Jalen knew he had to be careful. The message of human supremacy wasn't just about glorifying power for its own sake, it was about recognizing humanity's inherent strength and potential, its ability to overcome adversity and conquer the unknown. It was about showing that human beings, regardless of background, were capable of greatness. He began to receive offers from major publishing houses and even film studios who were interested in adapting his work into a series or a feature film. While the offers were tempting, Jalen was hesitant. He didn't want his message to be twisted for commercial gain. He had spent so much time building this movement, this vision, and he wasn't about to let it become just another franchise. To protect the integrity of his work, Jalen decided to take a different approach. Instead of signing contracts with the big names in entertainment, he would self-publish a book, a manifesto, if you will, that explained the full scope of his vision. The book would not just be a collection of his paintings, but a detailed exploration of the philosophy behind them, the idea of humanity's supremacy, and the journey that led him to create the Deathworlders. It would serve as both a statement of purpose and a guide for those who wanted to join the movement and help spread the message. As he began to write, Jalen found himself diving deeper into the philosophy of his work. He researched ancient civilizations, their myths and legends, and how they viewed themselves in relation to the cosmos. He studied the rise and fall of empires throughout history, comparing them to the potential future of humanity. What made humans so uniquely capable of greatness? What could they learn from the greatest warriors and thinkers in history? The more Jalen wrote, the more he realized that his movement wasn't just about fighting for supremacy, it was about understanding and embracing the full scope of what it meant to be human. The Deathworlders, in Jalen's eyes, were a reflection of humanity's best qualities. They were adaptable, resilient, and resourceful. They didn't just fight to survive, they fought to thrive, to create, and to lead. The Deathworlders were capable of building alliances with alien species, not just through force, but through wisdom and diplomacy. They weren't mindless warriors, they were brilliant tacticians, inventors, and leaders who used their intelligence and ingenuity to conquer even the most hostile environments. As he worked on the manuscript, Jalen began to receive messages from fans around the world who had been inspired by his vision. Some shared their own stories of overcoming personal challenges, while others expressed their desire to join the movement and contribute to the cause. Jalen realized that he had tapped into something far greater than himself. He had ignited a cultural shift, one that had the potential to inspire a new generation of humans to embrace their strength and potential. He began to speak at live events and conferences, discussing his work and the movement it had sparked. He encouraged his followers to think critically about the world around them, to challenge the narratives they had been fed, and to embrace their humanity without apology. "We are not weak," he told his audience. "We are not passive. We are capable of greatness. We have the strength to shape the future, to take our place among the stars, and to prove that we are the dominant force in the universe. His words resonated deeply with his audience. They weren't just looking for entertainment, they were looking for a vision, something to believe in. And Jalen had given them that vision. As the movement continued to gain momentum, Jalen started to see its impact on the world around him. More and more people were speaking out in support of human supremacy, embracing the ideals of the Deathworlders. The message wasn't just about dominance, it was about embracing the full potential of humanity and recognizing that the human race was not defined by its weaknesses, but by its strength. The Deathworlders weren't just a fictional creation, they were a reflection of what humanity could become if it learned to embrace its power. In a world that often seemed divided and uncertain, Jalen's message was a unifying force. It transcended borders, cultures, and backgrounds. People of all walks of life were joining the movement, coming together to celebrate the strength and resilience of humanity. The Deathworlders had become a symbol of pride and empowerment for a generation that had grown disillusioned with the status quo. Jalen had become a symbol himself, a figurehead for the movement, a voice for those who believed in the power of humanity. His art had sparked a revolution of thought, one that was spreading far beyond the realm of galleries and art shows. His vision of the future was no longer just a work of fiction, it was becoming a reality, and humanity was beginning to embrace its place at the top of the cosmic hierarchy. But with this newfound power came new responsibilities. Jalen knew that his movement was only just beginning. There would be opposition, there would be challenges, and there would be those who sought to derail the message. But Jalen was ready. He had fought to make his voice heard, and now, with the Deathworlders by his side, he was prepared to lead humanity to its rightful place in the stars. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun, and Jalen was at the forefront, ready to lead the charge. As Jalen's movement continued to gain momentum, he began to attract attention, not just from followers, but from powerful forces who didn't share his vision. Some saw his ideas as dangerous, others as a threat to the existing order. The movement, once a small group of passionate followers, was beginning to attract resistance from those in power, who feared the potential of this new wave of thought. They didn't fear the Deathworlders as fictional characters, they feared what they represented, a challenge to the status quo. The first major challenge came from a conglomerate of influential political and cultural elites, led by individuals who sought to control the narrative of human identity and potential. They had long held the reins of power, shaping public perception of humanity and its place in the world. They had been the ones to define what was acceptable, what was celebrated, and what was not. And now, Jalen's message was threatening to unravel all of that. It began subtly, at first. His book, Ascension, The Rise of the Deathworlders, which he had self-published to much fanfare, was targeted by several high-profile critics. These critics dismissed Jalen's work as dangerous propaganda, calling it an expression of toxic masculinity and supremacist ideology. They painted him as a divisive figure who was stirring up hatred rather than promoting strength. The mainstream media, which had once ignored Jalen, now began to pick up on the story. Interviews with so-called experts on art and social movements flooded news outlets, where they criticized his paintings and videos, labeling them as threatening and regressive. Jalen didn't expect the resistance to be easy. He had anticipated backlash, but what surprised him was how organized and persistent it was. They weren't just attacking him, they were attacking the very foundation of his ideas. The Deathworlders were being cast as a symbol of extremism rather than empowerment, and Jalen himself was painted as a figure who sought to incite violence and division. The more the media focused on him, the more his message was distorted. What was intended as a celebration of human strength and resilience was being twisted into something unrecognizable. The attacks were difficult to ignore. At first, Jalen tried to stay above the fray, focusing on his work and continuing to share his message with his audience. But as the pressure mounted, he realized that this battle was going to be fought on multiple fronts. The cultural elites were not just trying to silence him, they were trying to control the narrative and prevent his movement from growing any further. They didn't want a world where humanity embraced its strength and potential. They wanted a world where the status quo remained intact. This realization was a turning point for Jalen. The movement he had started wasn't just about painting and creating art anymore, it was about fighting for his right to express his ideas, to create a new vision for humanity, and to challenge the old ways of thinking. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a symbol of resistance, a leader for those who felt marginalized by the mainstream narratives of weakness and victimhood. Jalen knew he needed a strategy to counter this rising tide of opposition. He couldn't just rely on social media anymore, he needed to go on the offensive, to take his message directly to the people. So, he began planning a nationwide tour, one that would take him to major cities across the country. He would hold live events, lectures, and exhibitions where he could speak directly to his followers, explain the true meaning of his work, and demonstrate why humanity's strength was something worth celebrating. He would speak out against the critics who misinterpreted his art and show people that the Deathworlders weren't about division, they were about unity. They were about celebrating the greatness of humanity, of overcoming adversity, and of rising above the challenges that life presented. The tour was a logistical challenge, but Jalen was determined. He worked with his growing team to organize events in key cities, including New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. The goal was to rally his supporters, to show them that the Deathworlders weren't just a fictional concept, they were a powerful symbol of what humanity could achieve when it embraced its true potential. These events would not only showcase his artwork but also include live discussions about human supremacy, the philosophy behind his movement, and the importance of self-reliance and resilience. The first event in New York was a turning point. As Jalen took the stage in front of a crowd that had gathered to hear him speak, he could feel the weight of the moment. The room was filled with people who had been inspired by his art and his message, people who were ready to take action. The atmosphere was electric, a sense of solidarity and purpose that Jalen had never felt before. He wasn't just talking to a group of art lovers, he was speaking to a community that was ready to embrace their own strength and potential. Jalen opened the event with a powerful statement: the Deathworlders are not just characters in a painting. They are a symbol of what humanity can become. A species capable of rising to any challenge, no matter how difficult. The world wants us to believe that we are weak, that we are victims. But we are not weak. We are not victims. We are the future. And we will rise to the top of the galaxy, no matter what stands in our way. The crowd erupted into applause, the energy in the room palpable. Jalen felt a surge of confidence. This was his moment, and he knew that if he could reach these people, he could reach the world. He continued speaking about the importance of rejecting the narrative of weakness, of embracing the truth that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt, to innovate, and to survive against all odds. But it wasn't just his words that resonated, it was the artwork that accompanied them. As Jalen spoke, images of the Deathworlders appeared on the screen behind him, their faces filled with determination and strength. The paintings were not just illustrations, they were powerful symbols of the human spirit, of the potential that lay dormant within every person. People in the audience were moved, some even in tears, as they saw themselves reflected in the paintings of the Deathworlders. This was their story too. Jalen's message was clear: humanity had the power to dominate. But it wasn't about cruelty or mindless conquest. It was about proving that humanity could rise above its limitations, that it could be a force for good in the universe. The Deathworlders represented not just the future of humanity, they represented the potential that existed within every human being to achieve greatness. The success of the New York event marked the beginning of something bigger. As Jalen's tour continued, more and more people joined the movement. The resistance against him only fueled his determination. He knew that every attack against him was a sign that he was on the right path, that the message of human supremacy was one that needed to be heard. The elites who sought to silence him were afraid because they knew that the Deathworlders represented the future. And they knew that if humanity embraced its strength, there was nothing they could do to stop it. Jalen was no longer just an artist. He was a revolutionary, leading a movement that was about to change the course of history. And he wasn't backing down. The tension had been building for months. Jalen's movement had grown from a small circle of dedicated followers to a global force, one that challenged not just the art world but the very cultural and societal norms that had been dominant for centuries. As his influence spread, so too did the resistance against him. Those in power, politicians, media moguls, and cultural gatekeepers, could no longer ignore the growing tide of change. And now, they were ready to make their move. Jalen had anticipated this moment. The backlash had been fierce, but it had only fueled his resolve. His message was one of empowerment, of celebrating the potential of humanity to rise above its limitations and conquer adversity. But to his opponents, that message was a direct threat to their control. The elites, the ones who held the reins of power, didn't want humanity to recognize its strength. They feared that if people understood just how capable they were, they might start questioning everything: their place in society, the narratives they had been fed, and the systems that kept them in power. The final battle was approaching. Jalen knew that he couldn't back down now. He had already seen the power of the Deathworlders in action, the way his art had inspired millions of people to believe in their own potential. But now, the stakes were higher. The forces that sought to silence him were coming for him directly. It started with a smear campaign. The media, now fully aligned with the elites, launched a coordinated effort to discredit Jalen and his movement. Articles were published calling him a dangerous extremist, labeling his vision of human supremacy as nothing more than a cover for fascism and hate. They painted him as a manipulator, someone who was using art to incite violence and division. They twisted his words, distorted his message, and painted him as a villain. But Jalen was no stranger to adversity. He had spent his entire life fighting against expectations and limitations, and he wasn't about to let the media control the narrative. He knew that this was a fight for the hearts and minds of the people. The elites could spread their lies all they wanted, but he had something more powerful on his side: the truth. Jalen took to social media, directly addressing the smear campaign. He posted videos, speaking calmly but forcefully about his vision and the philosophy behind the Deathworlders. He explained that his message was not about hatred or domination, but about the empowerment of humanity. The Deathworlders weren't a call for violence, they were a call for strength, for resilience, and for unity. He reminded his followers that humanity's true power lay in its ability to adapt, to overcome, and to thrive, no matter what obstacles were placed in its path. The more Jalen spoke, the more his message resonated. The backlash only served to fuel the fire of his movement, and his followers became even more determined to stand by him. But the elites were not backing down either. They began to escalate their attacks, targeting Jalen's supporters, labeling them as followers of a dangerous cult and using their influence to silence anyone who publicly supported him. Jalen's team was forced to go underground. They communicated through encrypted channels, organizing rallies and protests in secret. The movement was no longer just about art, it had become a full-scale rebellion against the cultural elites who sought to suppress the truth. Jalen knew that the time for passive resistance was over. It was time to take action. The final push came when Jalen received an invitation to speak at a global summit on the future of humanity. The summit, hosted by some of the most influential leaders in politics, technology, and culture, had been convened to discuss the future of the human race. The elites had invited Jalen, likely hoping to silence him once and for all by making him an example of the dangers of his message. They thought they could discredit him in front of the world's most powerful figures, expose him as a fraud, and end the movement in one fell swoop. But Jalen wasn't intimidated. He knew this was his moment, his opportunity to speak directly to the world and lay bare the truth behind the Deathworlders and the message of human supremacy. The world would finally hear his voice, and nothing could stop him. The day of the summit arrived, and Jalen stood before an audience of the most powerful people in the world. The room was filled with an air of tension. The elites were there to maintain their control, to protect their narratives and their hold on power. But Jalen had something they didn't have: the will of the people. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for millions of people who had come to embrace the Deathworlders, who had come to believe that humanity was capable of greatness. He began his speech with a simple question: what makes humanity great? The room fell silent. The question hung in the air, daring anyone to answer. Jalen took a step forward and continued, "We are not great because we dominate. We are great because we survive, we adapt, we evolve. We are great because we face the unknown, and we rise to meet it. The Deathworlders are not a vision of mindless conquest. They are a symbol of what we can achieve when we embrace our true potential." Jalen's words were powerful, but it was the images behind him that truly made an impact. As he spoke, the screen behind him lit up with images of the Deathworlders, warriors who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. The crowd watched in awe as the visuals combined with Jalen's words, creating a picture of humanity not just surviving, but thriving. The Deathworlders were not just characters in a painting, they were a representation of the collective power of humanity, the strength that lay within each person to overcome and succeed. As Jalen finished his speech, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the applause of the elites, their faces were stony and grim, but it was the applause of the people who had come to see him speak, the supporters who believed in his message. The tide was turning. The elites may have tried to silence him, but Jalen had shown the world that humanity's strength was undeniable. In the days that followed, the media could no longer ignore the power of the movement. The Deathworlders were no longer just a niche concept, they had become a global symbol of human strength and potential. Jalen's speech had ignited a fire that could not be extinguished, and the movement spread like wildfire across the world. Jalen had led humanity to its ascension, and the Deathworlders had risen with him. They were no longer just a vision, they were the future. And nothing could stand in their way. The final ascension had begun. Humanity was ready to take its place among the stars.